The DNA results changed everything. Carol Martinez stared at her laptop screen in her Denver apartment, reading the same line over and over again. "You have a close family match." The name that appeared next to it made her heart stop. Janet Williams. Her best friend of 30 years. The woman she called her sister, the person who knew her better than anyone else in the world, was actually her biological sister. For 3 decades they had joked about being separated at birth. It turned out they weren't joking at all. But to understand how 2 women discovered their sisterhood on live television after 30 years of thinking they were just friends, we need to go back to the beginning of a story that proves sometimes the heart knows what the mind cannot comprehend. Janet Williams, 48, and Carol Martinez, 46, met in 1993 in the most ordinary way possible. They were both new employees at a Denver insurance company, both struggling single mothers trying to make ends meet. Janet had recently divorced and was raising her 8-year-old daughter alone. Carol was 24, working 2 jobs to support her infant son after his father disappeared. What drew them together wasn't just their similar circumstances. It was something deeper, an instant connection that neither could explain. From their first conversation in the company break room, they felt like they had known each other forever. They finished each other's sentences, laughed at the same jokes, shared the same fears and dreams with an intimacy that usually takes years to develop. Both women were adopted. Janet had been placed with a loving family in Colorado when she was 6 months old. Carol had been raised by her adoptive parents in New Mexico until she was 18, when she moved to Denver for college. Neither had ever searched for their biological families. Their adoptive parents had given them everything they needed, and both women felt that looking for their birth families might somehow dishonor the people who had raised them. But as their friendship deepened, people began to notice something remarkable about Janet and Carol. They didn't just act like sisters, they looked like them too. Both had the same dark eyes, the same laugh lines, the same way of tilting their heads when they were thinking. Coworkers constantly mistook them for siblings. Strangers assumed they were related. The women themselves joked about being twins separated at birth, never imagining how close to the truth they were. Over the years, their friendship became the most stable, nurturing relationship either had ever known. They raised their children together, creating a blended family that functioned better than many biological ones. They weathered divorces, job losses, financial struggles, and family crises side by side. When Carol's son was diagnosed with leukemia at age 12, Janet took a leave of absence from work to help with his care. When Janet's daughter struggled with addiction in her 20s, Carol opened her home and her heart without hesitation. By 2023, both women were in their late 40s, empty nesters who had built successful careers and stable lives. Their children, now adults, considered each other siblings. Janet and Carol lived in houses just 3 blocks apart, spent holidays together, and talked every single day. They were family in every way that mattered, even though they shared no legal or biological connection. Or so they thought. The DNA test was Carol's idea, not because she wanted to find biological relatives, but because her doctor had recommended genetic testing after she was diagnosed with a hereditary condition that could affect her treatment options. The 23andMe kit sat on her kitchen counter for weeks before she worked up the courage to send it in. When the results arrived, Carol was prepared to learn about her ethnic background and potential health risks. She wasn't prepared to discover that her best friend's DNA was also in the database. Flagged as an immediate family match, the probability was overwhelming. Janet Williams was her biological sister. Carol stared at the screen for hours, trying to process what she was seeing. 30 years of friendship suddenly made perfect sense. The instant connection, the shared mannerisms, the way they could communicate without words, the feeling that they had found their person in a world of strangers. They hadn't found their soulmate friend. They had found their sister. But how to tell Janet? How do you reveal to someone that everything they thought they knew about their relationship was both completely true and completely different? Carol spent weeks wrestling with the decision, knowing that this revelation would change everything between them. The opportunity came when Ellen's producers reached out to Janet for their Friendship Goals segment. Janet had been nominated by coworkers who were amazed by her 30-year friendship with Carol, the way they had created a family from nothing, the example they set for loyalty and unconditional love. Ellen's team was interested in celebrating friendships that transcended traditional definitions of family. When Janet called Carol to share the exciting news about being selected for Ellen's show, Carol knew this was the moment, but instead of telling Janet over the phone, she made a decision that would create one of the most powerful moments in Ellen's show history. She would surprise Janet on national television with the truth about who they really were. Carol contacted Ellen's producers and shared the DNA results. The team was stunned. In 15 years of producing surprise reunions and family revelations, they had never encountered a story quite like this. Two women who had been sisters all along, who had found each other without knowing they were lost, who had created the exact relationship they were genetically programmed to have. Ellen DeGeneres had built her career on surprising her guests, but even she was moved by Carol's story. The plan was simple. Janet would appear as scheduled to talk about their friendship. Carol would be seated in the audience, and when the moment felt right, Ellen would reveal the truth that would redefine everything. The Ellen DeGeneres Show studio that Tuesday afternoon buzzed with anticipation. Ellen's team had kept the surprise under wraps, but there was an electricity in the air that seemed to hint at something extraordinary about to unfold. Janet sat in the green room, nervous but excited, wearing the blue dress Carol had helped her pick out, carrying photos of their 30-year friendship to share with Ellen. Behind the scenes, Ellen made a decision that would amplify the power of this moment. Our next guest, Ellen announced to the studio audience, is here to celebrate a friendship that has lasted 30 years. She and her best friend have created a family bond so strong that everyone assumes they're biological sisters. Please welcome Janet Williams. Janet walked onto the stage beaming, overwhelmed by the lights and applause. Ellen greeted her with that signature hug, and immediately Janet felt at home. There was something in Ellen's energy that reminded her of Carol, that same warmth and acceptance that had drawn her to her best friend 3 decades ago. Janet, Ellen said as they settled into their chairs, tell me about Carol. What makes your friendship so special? Janet's face lit up as she began to speak. Ellen, Carol is my chosen family. We met 30 years ago, and it was like finding a piece of myself I didn't know was missing. People always say we're like sisters, and I guess we are, in every way except blood. She's been there for every important moment of my life. In the audience, Carol wiped away tears as she listened to Janet describe their relationship. Hearing Janet talk about their bond with such love and appreciation made Carol even more certain that revealing their biological connection would only make their relationship stronger, not change its fundamental nature. You know, Ellen said, leaning forward with a knowing smile, sometimes the universe has a funny way of bringing the right people into our lives at exactly the right time. Janet nodded enthusiastically. Absolutely. Carol and I always joke that we must have been sisters in another life. The connection was instant. We just fit. That's when Ellen's expression became more serious, more purposeful. Janet, what would you say if I told you that Carol is here today? Janet's eyes went wide with excitement. Really? Oh my gosh, where is she? Ellen gestured toward the audience. She's right there in the 4th row. Carol, would you come down here? The camera panned to Carol as she stood up, tears streaming down her face. But there was something in her expression that Janet couldn't quite read. This wasn't just excitement about surprising her best friend. This was something deeper. Carol walked down the aisle slowly, clutching an envelope in her hands. When she reached the stage, Ellen guided her to the chair next to Janet, who immediately grabbed her hand. What's going on? Janet asked, sensing that this moment was bigger than a simple surprise appearance. Ellen looked at both women, understanding the magnitude of what was about to unfold. Carol, do you want to tell her, or should I? Carol took a deep breath and turned to face Janet. Janet, remember how we always joked about being separated at birth? Janet nodded, confused but smiling. Well, Carol said, her voice shaking, it turns out we weren't joking. She handed Janet the envelope containing the DNA results. We're biological sisters. We really are sisters. The studio fell completely silent. Janet stared at the envelope, then at Carol, then back at the envelope. The implications of what she had just heard were too enormous to process immediately. What do you mean? Janet whispered. Carol explained about the DNA test, about seeing Janet's name appear as an immediate family match, about the weeks of wrestling with how to tell her. As the reality sank in, Janet's expression transformed from confusion to wonder to overwhelming joy. We're sisters, Janet said, as if testing how the words felt. We're actually sisters. We've been sisters for 30 years, Carol replied. We just didn't know the biology matched the love. Ellen, tears streaming down her own face, watched as the two women embraced with a new understanding of their bond. 30 years of chosen family had just been revealed as biological family, and somehow that made their love story even more beautiful. This is incredible, Ellen said to the audience and cameras. You two found each other without knowing you were lost. You created the exact relationship you were meant to have. The studio audience erupted in applause, but Janet and Carol barely heard it. They were lost in their own world, processing the revelation that their greatest friendship had actually been their greatest family reunion. As the show continued, Ellen learned more about their parallel stories. Both had been placed for adoption from the same agency within 18 months of each other. Their biological mother had been a teenager who couldn't care for multiple children. The adoptive families lived in different states, ensuring the sisters would never accidentally encounter each other growing up. But somehow 30 years later, they had found their way to the same city, the same company, the same break room on the same day, and they had recognized each other in the way that only siblings can, even without conscious knowledge of their connection. The episode sparked conversations across America about adoption, family, and the mysterious ways that love transcends knowledge. Janet and Carol became spokeswomen for the idea that family is created by choice and sustained by love, whether or not biology is involved. Most importantly, their discovery didn't change their relationship. They had been sisters in every way that mattered long before the DNA test confirmed it. The revelation simply added scientific validation to what their hearts had always known. They belonged together. Ellen DeGeneres learned that day that the most powerful surprises aren't the ones we plan, but the ones that reveal truths that were always there, waiting to be discovered by hearts wise enough to recognize home when they find it.